I'm going to talk today mainly about the campaign that we helped to launch in February this year, which is focused on Egypt. But just before I do, just want to give you a flavour of some of the things we've done in relation to other countries. You'll find we're not a very large organisation. We have, as I said, a number of unions affiliated, but the network of people involved is relatively modest. So we don't pretend to be able to cover in depth all of the countries in the region that have been affected by revolutionary upsurges and popular mobilisations since 2011. We've done quite a lot of work, mainly around Egypt. We've also built links with colleagues in Tunisia. We hosted a Tunisian trade unionist who was the representative of public sector unions in Kasserine, which is a fairly poor area in the north of Tunisia, who came and was the guest actually at the NUT. He's from a teaching union background. That was in 2012. We've also done a lot of work around Bahrain, and in fact Dave came to our recent AGM, and we're hoping to continue collaborating together around raising issues in relation to Bahrain, which I know this is something that your branch has taken up. Plus we've also, where we can, we'll report on things in places as diverse as Lebanon, Yemen, Jordan, Syria, and so on. So to come to the question around Egypt, because I think that that's really one of the main focuses of our work at the moment. In February this year, we helped to launch a new international initiative called Egypt Solidarity, which is focused on the repression that's happening in Egypt at the moment. It's raising the awareness and campaigning against the human rights violations that are taking place there as a result of the counter-revolution that's currently unfolding. Of course, people will have, I'm sure, watched back in 2011 as millions of Egyptians took part in protests and strikes which overthrew Hosni Mubarak, the dictator who'd been in power there for 30 years. Since 2011, we've seen enormous continued popular mobilisations, massive struggles to win both political freedoms and social justice. But unfortunately, over the last 6 months, we've really seen a massive step backwards in terms of the counter-revolution is really now unfolding in force. I'd be very happy to kind of answer questions and discuss with people about some of the more detailed history that took place between 2011 to 2013, but I want to just focus for the moment on what's happened since the military removed Mohamed Morsi, who was the Muslim Brotherhood affiliated president, from power on the 3rd of July 2013, because that has really opened a new phase in the revolution, one in which the institutions of the old state, the old regime, have really become clear they're back in the saddle. They are carrying out enormous repression and trying, although their fire is targeted largely initially at the Muslim Brotherhood, actually the aim is to try and reverse the revolution in total and trying to smash any hope of making good the promises and demands that were raised back in 2011. So the situation is very serious, and one of the reasons why we decided to launch a campaign around this is precisely because international solidarity with people who are resisting that repression and who are at the receiving end of that repression is very, very important. The regime thinks that it can get away with anything, and it can count actually on the support of our own government in doing this. People will have seen probably in the last week or a couple of weeks how David Cameron rushed to announce an inquiry into the activities of the Muslim Brotherhood. Essentially, it seems basing his arguments entirely on what the Egyptian military is telling him, and probably to appease the Saudi regime, which is very much backing up the military in Egypt in terms of the counter-revolution. Now, in terms of the work that we've done, and many of the people that we worked with in the independent unions in Egypt, almost none of them were at all friendly to the Muslim Brotherhood. We documented and were in support of the protests that were being led by trade unionists and others against the Muslim Brotherhood when they were in power. But it's important to recognise, I think, that the scale of the crackdown that's taking place against the Muslim Brotherhood is absolutely horrendous. And as I said, the focus of that is really to try and smash the revolutionary movement and to try and return things back to, and even if possible, they would like to get away with restoring an even worse form of dictatorship than there was under Mubarak. So Egypt Solidarity as an initiative is something that has focused very much on defending human rights, defending the right freedom of expression. We've focused on a number of cases around the attacks on the media, attacks on the universities, which I'm going to come on to in a minute, right to a fair trial, rights to be represented by a lawyer, right not to be tortured when arrested, all of these very basic things which are being enormously violated by the current regime in Egypt. Just to give you some headline figures about the scale of the crackdown, since July last year, according to Amnesty International, at least 1,400 people killed, largely by the security forces, although actually the figure is probably a lot higher than that, because many deaths would not necessarily be reported or attributed directly to repression because of the level of fear. At least, according to the Financial Times article I read this morning, now the figures stand at around 16,000 people in prison since July last year. Again, many of them, very, very large numbers of them, arrested arbitrarily on trumped-up charges, nothing to do with any kind of provable relationship with the Muslim Brotherhood or any other organisation or any kind of criminal activity. Again, many Egyptian local human rights organisations are sending lawyers to defend people and revealing really horrific cases. There was a particularly horrific case fairly recently. It was in January or February. A young, very, very heavily pregnant woman who was in fact 9 months pregnant, was arrested in a sweep that took place in her neighbourhood while she was walking down the street to go and have a blood test. And she was swept up in this, there was a demonstration and then police running around arresting people. She was ended up forced to give birth in prison, chained to her hospital bed on some trumped-up charge of being a member of the Muslim Brotherhood. I mean, it's absolutely unbelievable, the scale of repression. And then there's a number of really very disturbing developments in terms of death sentences imposed on large numbers of people. So, for example, one of the most outrageous examples of this was 529 people who were condemned to death in relation to events that took place in Minya, which is in the south of Egypt, back in August last year, where they were condemned to death for the murder of a police officer during several days of rioting and protests in the town in the wake of the military's crushing of protests by Mohamed Morsi's supporters in Cairo, which also left hundreds of people dead. It seems quite unbelievable to imagine that 500 plus people could be sentenced across a trial that lasted no more than 50 minutes. The defence lawyers didn't even have time to read out the names of the accused, let alone offer any kind of defence. Now, this is only the first of a series of mass trials of alleged Muslim Brotherhood supporters, which is going to take place in Minya. Another one is set to take place in a few weeks' time, but it gives you an indication of what the regime is attempting to do. In relation to the situation on universities, because I think that's something of particular interest and concern for UCU members. Again, we've seen since the crackdown began really in August and July last year, the whole of this academic year has been constant warfare really in the university sector. People again may have seen that there was, for example, a bomb attack in Cairo University quite recently where a police officer was killed by a nail bomb. Now, the military regime will tend to focus on these kind of things and say, look, the problem is terrorism, the problem isn't about freedom of expression or anything like that. But actually, if you go back over the past 8 to 9 months, you'll see, and we've compiled statistics on this, which are part of a briefing we're about to release. You'll see almost every university in Egypt, there have been both massive protests, enormous repression, random arrests, very large numbers of students injured in protests, at least 8 students killed, many of them just shot dead on campus using birdshot, shotgun pellets, including, for example, Mohammed Reda, who was killed in Cairo University. He's an 19-year-old engineering student shot dead during a protest last November. And that triggered a wave of student protests and occupations. I think around 5 or probably 6 students have been killed in Al-Azhar University alone in very similar circumstances. And there are dozens upon dozens of cases, hundreds of students in fact, who've been arrested, many of whom, again, are taken away and people don't even know where they are. There have also been a number of wait sweeps of arrests against university staff. Generally, in the case of university staff, lecturers and other staff, it's on the grounds of people being suspected of being Muslim Brotherhood members or supporters. And although it's not been on such a big scale as in the case of students, this has also been quite large numbers have been arrested in recent months. So, in all, the picture is very bleak. But I think it's really important also to focus on what we can do. And firstly, the most important thing is that people in Egypt are continuing to resist and continuing in the most horrendous circumstances to put themselves at risk, even by doing very simple things like going and standing and holding a poster in the middle of the university. I mean, the incredible bravery of people who, when they know that their friends have been taken away and locked up or may face trumped up charges or even to be killed, literally to go again and again and stand there with the names of the people who've been detained, demanding the right to freedom and demanding that the regime stop the repression. So publicising that, making sure that people know, making sure the Egyptian government knows that the trade union movement internationally will stand with those people is incredibly important. We've launched a number of campaigns through Egypt Solidarity since we started in February this year. One of which that's running at the moment on the website is we're collecting signatures around the issue of the death sentences. So actually we have now several thousand people internationally have signed a collective letter condemning this, and we're planning to go and hand that into the embassy around the time of the next lot of trials and the appeal on the original trial. We've also created a series of resources around what's happening in the universities, which are on our website, and that's the link that I sent to Steve so it can be circulated around the branch. We want people to use these in any way you can, to circulate them to other colleagues in UCU, to get them into universities and institutions, to help organise other meetings, and to get them distributed at trade union events. We'll be coming to UCU Congress and talking about it more, and giving people an idea about where we can next take the campaign. One thing that we will definitely be doing very shortly is releasing a pamphlet which we've just written, which is quite a thorough briefing on the background situation in the universities in Egypt. So it's around a 16-page pamphlet. It's been written by Nicola Pratt, who is a colleague from Warwick University. She's a professor of Middle East politics there and has very long experience actually working in Egypt as a researcher. And that will be available online and we hope printed in the next